Maybe I got the headphones on.
All right, let's see if there's any feedback left. Oh, much better.
Much better.
Much better. Great. All right, man. A little
Now
adjustment.
we're in business.
This is low qual. This is low like low production quality, man. It's not some professional level.
Well, who needs high price technology when you can just do it this way?
Exactly, man. Exactly. And I have a lot of fun doing this, Greg. So don't take me too seriously, and it's great, man. Yeah. Anyway, so there's no feedback now. Chat's loving it. So anyway, there's someone in the chat that says Colehurst is like 8 minutes away from Lethbridge, and then Coaldale is about 20 minutes. And it's so funny because I would love to talk a little bit about these smaller communities within Alberta that surround the Calgary greater area. And I don't whether or not that's the right way to put it, but I've been in Alberta for like the last year and a half now, and I've been through a lot of these places, and I've gotten to see sort of like the differences. And you'd think that 2 hours isn't that big of a distance and whatnot, but there's huge differences between, let's say, something like Calgary and Lethbridge and like Medicine Hat, which is like sort of like that triangle of cities, right?
Right.
But anyway, back to a little bit about your youth and growing up. You saw a lot of changes in Calgary, and now that you've been to Toronto, you've seen a little bit about the big apple of Canada, so called. Maybe you share a little bit of your, talk a little bit more about what Calgary's like and what Ontario's like, some of those things.
Well, definitely when I was in Toronto, it reminded me of a smaller version of New York. The way the buildings were, especially downtown. You have these bigger digital billboards, and there's such a fast-paced environment in Toronto.
Hmm.
It didn't seem to matter who was walking where. They always had to walk at a very fast pace to get there.
Yep.
And that's something that blew my mind.
Money makes the world go round, man. In my last podcast, we talked a little bit about that. People are walking to get money, man.
Well, I mean, when you come to Calgary, like downtown, during the week, it's busy, but it's not crowded, and it's not where people are speed walking.
Right.
They're walking, at a decent pace, but it's not like you would see in Toronto. And weekends are nice in downtown. Lots to do, but there's not as much congestion.
Yeah, I noticed that too. Funny you should say about downtown Calgary versus downtown Toronto. One thing I noticed in Calgary while I drive through Calgary is that they have a lot of these. Let's focus a little bit more about the roads. It sounds inconsequential, but roads in Calgary, I find that in the major city area, there are these pedestrian sort of like flashing signals that you can press, and so that there's a light that signals that there is a pedestrian walking and that you need to stop and yield.
Right.
And whereas in Toronto, I think there are more street lights than that, and there's sort of like one-way streets to let traffic flow faster. Right. I don't think those yield signs would work effectively in Toronto simply because there are so many more cars and there's so many more people.
Yeah, it would definitely create, some fatal accidents.
Absolutely.
Because you have people that are so designed and adjusted to the way things are in their environment. If you were to put something new in there, it would take them a while to get used to it.
That's a good point. Reminds me of bad drivers. A lot of people blame a certain type of people for being bad drivers. Perhaps it's not about the driver, but the environment.
Absolutely. Well, look,
I'm in defense of certain groups of people.
And well, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of stupid people operating vehicles too.
Oh, absolutely, man. 100%. So, yeah. No, do you drive in Calgary quite a bit?
Yeah. Yeah. That's one thing that I'm doing right now. Actually, I'm working with Skip.
Oh, okay. Maybe you just, I don't even know
So
what you do, dude. Like that's how much of we are such strangers. Yet, like I really like you so much that the first couple of people that came into my mind for a podcast was you and a few others. So maybe you could share, man. Share as much as you possibly can,
sure.
so I know who you are.
Well, I mean, you and I have definitely made a connection. Like you said, we haven't been able to get together because of distance, whatever. But
We
um,
tried golf, virtual golf, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. We tried. Eventually that'll happen. Maybe in the future, I'm gonna definitely give it a shot.
Well, here's hoping, right?
Yep. Yep.
But for me, myself, before before we met, I was a concrete finisher. So I was always out, doing restoration work for parkades, and I guess giving more of a, flesh and meat to the bones, so people kind of understand what I was doing. There's parkades in Calgary that are, I don't know, they were made in the '60s and just kind of abandoned. So what we would do, we would come along and we would find the parts in the parkade that needed restoration, and we would jackhammer that area out. We would put new rebar in. The electrical part, if it ended up getting damaged, that was on a management company because there was no blueprints. So we would put new rebar in. We would form it. We would pour the cement back in, and then when we were done doing the whole parkade, we would put a waterproof membrane on top so that it would give a little more protection to the existing and the new surface that we put in.
I'm gonna interrupt you and
So,
ask you that job that sort of contract. Who contracted you to do it? Was it the company or the sort of the business area, or was it the government for the city?
well, it was through, excuse me, it was through WRE Management, and they contracted the company that I was working with. So they contracted us to come out and restore the parkade.
Okay.
So it was there. If you can picture what seismic machine does,
I
where
cannot,
it takes
Craig.
no, okay. So it's basically a seismic machine. It puts out sounds like vibrations, right? And it goes to the ground, and then it reflects back up to some kind of imagery system. And with that, it can tell where, what parts are garbage, what parts aren't. So instead of using that expensive piece of machinery, what we did, we took a chain, attached it to a broomstick, and we just simply dragged it across the cement. And
That's impressive.
it sounds so I don't know.
Archaic,
Yes, that's the word.
but it did the job, and you saved a lot of money doing that. Whoever thought about that must have been the genius. Whoever did that. Yeah.
I don't know who did, but yeah, I give him praise for that one.
God,
But
what you did on a daily basis, like what hours did you work? Because it sounds like very, very hard work from what I can tell.
well, we started at 7. We finished at 4 o'clock. Um, Sometimes 7 o'clock. Just depending on where we were in the process of that job. But mixing cement, uh, jackhammering, hauling rebar, um, shoveling the debris, taking wheelbarrows, dumping the debris to different places. That was pretty much the extent of it.
And you'd work within the
So
team. How big would be your team of people that you worked with?
6 people.
Guys that were on rotation, or guys that were on your team for a long duration of time?
Yeah, it was the same set of guys for the duration of the project.
That's cool. I mean, from a civilian standpoint, what I can imagine is um, when you're driving through the city and there's lots of construction, and a lot of civilians tend to do this complaint. I mean, obviously, like, I'm not exactly sure if it's the same, but you get the idea. It's like a lot of people tend to drive these roads, and they don't know how these roads are maintained and the construction behind it, and the technology and all the planning involved, and they have the audacity. I mean, I'm part of it too. Is like, complaining about traffic or complaining about construction and making it sort of like this normal conversation that people have. It's like, oh, traffic's really bad. Like, for example, a lot of people complain about Montreal roads. Montreal roads are so bad. Like, they're always under construction. Ha 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 ha. But to actually speak with someone who worked daily on getting these roads repaired and getting these things done is a completely different like side of it. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. I give a lot of respect to the guys that that work on major product projects to make things more efficient.
Yeah.
There's going to be delays, and in order to get things done, that's a part of the process.
Hmm. So then, how long did you do that for, Craig?
Did that for 2 years.
And did you go to school for this?
Nope.
How
Nope.
did you do, like, did you, because I remember you said you played high school sports and you kind of went into, did you do high school and then go right into the workforce, or how did you?
No, from high school, I went into the armed forces for 2 years.
Oh, I did not know that. Cool. And
Surprise.
based where?
I was based out of Calgary. Like, it was the Mawada Armories, which is down on, what is it now? 11th Street and, oh, I want to say 9th Ave, Southwest. But I did all my training out in Wainwright,
Oh, I know where
Alberta.
I know about Wainwright. Yeah, cool.
A little hole in the ground, or at least it was when I was there.
Man, that's fascinating. My co-host that I used to do this with has family uh, that's part of the Navy and the Canadian Forces and all that, and he would know so much more about and seeing and the average Canadian. Like, I would consider myself very Canadian because I love my country, but to know nothing, to have no substantial knowledge of something that is this important, our military and our armed forces. The only things that I kind of picked up on are certain bits and pieces from literature and history with Canadian forces overseas. Most of it, honestly, written in a certain narrative that may or may not be negative. Um,
Yeah.
Maybe you could share a little bit about your time. Do you miss that part of your life where you were in the armed forces?
Um, to an extent, yes, because you're always learning about yourself. It's just like,
The
um,
chat says cousin Bill did that. Wainwright, LMAO. This is from someone who might be from Alberta.
oh man, no, when you're put into a high intensity environment, you have no choice but to um, go along with the things that have already been implemented that make the military what it is. And so, in order to, as it were, catch yourself up to where they are, there's a process that you have to go through, and it is very challenging. But in the same sense, you learn a lot about yourself. You walk in, you think, oh yeah, I know who I am. I know my my limits. You don't know what your limits are until you get into an environment like that.
Hmm.
No, I I really wasn't a big runner when I got into the military, but from day one, because I was in the infantry, a lot of our work is cardio, the vast majority of it. So
Hmm.
every day we were running 24 kilometers.
Every day, 24 kilometers.
Yeah.
Good. Oh my God, that's
Yeah.
with your equipment.
So you have 50 pounds of equipment, you have your full military dress, and you have 1 liter worth of water.
So if that liter of water runs out, that's it.
That's it.
Wow. Wow.
So, I mean, that's just kind of a glimpse into the strains that you get put through.
I'm sure you remember all of those runs.
Yeah, yeah. It- there was one point I was just getting right pissed off because there was a person in front of me who couldn't keep the cadence. So they were, dropping back just like an inch or two, which would throw me off just enough. And then
Oh.
the master corporal would just drop his speed a bit because he noticed that I was starting to get pissed off, and he'd be like, "Are you getting mad, Craig?" I'm like, "Yes." He says, "Good. Then focus that rage into your running and forget about that person in front of you."
Wow.
Well, and you really can't say much, to somebody who's in a higher rank than you. You just kind of bite your tongue and go with it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
If you don't mind me asking, what made you decide to get into the military?
well, when I heard about my great grandfather, he was a captain in the Danish armed forces. I don't know one way or the other if he was in the Navy side or was in the Army side. Because believe it or not, they have captains in the Army, in the Danish Army.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was because of that it kind of intrigued me, and then of course, you have a little motivation on top of it where people are like, nah, you won't be able to do it. That kind of negative motivation. I'm like, okay, okay, we'll see about this. So that was kind of
Yeah, it was how you got
what,
in. Yeah.
yeah,
Did you sign up with friends or did you just do it yourself?
myself.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I didn't know anybody.
Usually those decisions you kind of. I mean, when I was figuring out what I was going to do with my life, a lot of it was a lot of my decision making was based on what my friends were doing and how they were kind of navigating the future and so I always find it very admirable that people can actually make decisions on their own without the influence of other people. I'm not saying that it's negative, but I just think that it is something that I'm not very familiar with. I usually make decisions based on asking my friends or getting people to give me their second thoughts.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, opinions are opinions, and you wade into your own decision making. Um, some people are born in a more sociable environment where, you know, let's say it's a bigger family,
Mm-hmm.
you know, whereas myself, there was just, me and my sister.
Mm-hmm.
So we really didn't have a lot of friends and stuff like that. So we just managed to figure out things on our own.
Now, here's a question. In your humble opinion, do you think that Canadian youth today would benefit from joining the military?
Absolutely. They would know what respect means. They would know
Oh, so
what
are you saying?
works.
Are you? I'm just kidding. I'm just jumping into this, but like, I can already hear it in your tone. It's like, where do I start with the Canadian youth of today? No, no, right. Okay, so go ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting you. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not saying that all youth are like this because that would be wrong for me to say that.
Mm-hmm.
But there seems to be a rather unhealthy trend to the me and screw everybody else mentality. And it's led to a lot of, um, I don't know, a lot of erosion to what people like myself in my age category
Um,
see.
sorry, I'm gonna say the chat says Chrissy says I had a lot of peers growing up that were in cadets and scouts and then continued to the military. Most of them, however, decided to go to school instead too.
Well, it makes it a lot easier, if you're in cadets and you decide to go onward to the military, to the Navy, to the Air Force, whatever. It definitely makes it a lot easier because you already have that basic training.
Right,
You already have that knowledge,
right.
and those people I've actually met quite a few of them where they are very focused.
Mm.
They are very um,
Motivated.
motivated. They know who they are,
Mm.
and so for them to navigate through life is a lot easier for them.
I find that certain students of mine who are in cadets or in any higher level, so yeah, cadets. I find that it's sort of school becomes a second life for them. I mean, because you give these uh, kids the option. I mean, you almost lead parallel lives. On the one hand, you have a highly regulated environment where everything expectations are high. You have officers who are ranked above you. There is a strong hierarchical design and system that is implemented, and so you fit right in as sort of like a tool, like a piece, and you know your place and you know what your job is. Whereas in school, the promotion of, I mean, from not what I know from school is that they promote this inclusive area where everyone can try to be anything that they want, and it's almost as if there's no direction, less
Right?
direction and more I guess space for you to fail and try new things. And as a result, I find that those who are in a highly regulated area would see that and kind of go, well, this is something that is highly frowned upon. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Well, yeah, because like you said before, there's no structure. There's nothing implemented to give any kind of guidance.
Did you find that when you were going to school? Oh, I guess you didn't go to cadets. You went to school and then you went to the military.
Right, right.
Right, right, right.
I mean, I've met people that were in cadets and then went into the armed forces, that I met while I was there. And they definitely had a broader range of knowledge that I could draw upon myself. And it really helped. And during my actual interview process, I was being interviewed by a major. And one thing that he said to me really struck a nerve. And I didn't realize the impact of what he was saying until I got out of the army. So what he said to me, he said, civilians are lazy. Now, being a civilian and going through the interview process and hearing him say that, it really irritated me. It really got under my skin. But when I got out of the army, I understood what he meant. There's no structure, there's no drive, there's no discipline. You know, I I could be walking down the street, and the way I hold myself, the amount of confidence that I have in myself, I've had people come up to me and say, "You were in the army, weren't you?" I'm like, "Yeah, actually, I was." And just out of curiosity, why would you say that? They're like, "It's the way you present yourself. You give off that kind of not arrogant, but very confident feeling." And that's kind of something that maybe not a lot of people, but some people associate with the army because it gives you that feeling, that knowledge of knowing who you are, what you stand for, and what you're doing in life.
That's very true. I think it reminds me of a guy I met when I was on a bus from England to Ireland to catch a flight, and the guy who sat beside me for the 10 hours I was on the bus, I'd missed my flight from the UK out to Canada. So anyway, I took the bus and to Ireland to catch the next one. Long story short. Anyway, I met this guy, and he's from Singapore. And in Singapore, it's mandated that you have to go to the army for 2 years. And there's a lot of countries out there that make it mandatory. And I realized that his composure, the way that he carried himself, quite confident, sort of sure of what he was saying, direction, and he had really good direction. So I can attest to that. I feel that. I can understand that. And I can only imagine how frustrating it is to see, a new generation of people come out who have not gone through that discipline and conduct themselves in ways that are almost lazy or almost sort of disrespected, like this, not knowing that there is that sort of process that you have to go through. And I think it can be very frustrating for people, especially veterans and people who've been through the military. I don't know. That's how I see it.
Well, there's one guy that I got the opportunity to know after I got out, and he was a veteran, and he served. I can't remember which regiment he was in, but he went through Vimy Ridge. He went through that whole entire experience, and I had the opportunity to sit and just spend hours talking with him.
Wow.
And even just the disrespect shown from other relatives that were like, "Oh, is he bothering you? Telling the same stories." I'm like, you don't understand. They're not stories. This is his life. To go through something so stressful, so strenuous, that it strips you of a lot of your humanity.
Wow.
So when you come back, you don't know how to fit in. And a lot of people don't understand that part.
I find that there is discussion of Canadian politics in terms of funding from the government. Now, I don't know much about politics. I like to ask questions, but I don't know. Maybe you can share a little bit about your viewpoint and perspective. money coming from the government and allocating it to our military. Um, there are people with different perspectives on it. What do you think? Do you think that we're getting enough from the government? Is that something that is an issue? Are we getting much representation in in the Navy, in the armed forces, in all that area? Are we putting enough time and effort into showcasing that part of Canada? Where, I mean, because from what I can tell and from our conversation, it's that the proud Canadians range from all over the place. We have proud Canadians that new Canadians are proud Canadians. Old Canadians who've been here for generations and generations are proud Canadians. Now, I mean, when it comes to sort of nationalism and this sort of nationalistic fervor, this ability, that we bleed Canada, this idea, can we measure that in any way? Do you think?
Through the military, no.
Mm-hmm.
When I was, I don't know, I think it was in my early teens. Even then, we had a very strong, very, very healthy military. At one point in time, even our Air Force was ranked number 3 in the world. Where when you think about that, let that sink in for a bit, 3rd in the world.
Wow.
But since that time up until now, they have just absolutely dismantled and destroyed it.
I'm going to interrupt your thought process. What I've read in the news is that there have been purchases from the Philippines for certain equipment and certain planes, and then that I mean, that's from a civilian standpoint. That's what I've been reading, and the contract fell through, and nothing happened between that. From what I can read, it's that sort of like the military in Canada right now is sort of in a mess, or it's sort of like very confusing.
It is. There's been no focus. You know, um, the type of aircraft, the type of warships, the type of whatever kind of machine you can think of that would be used in the armed forces is all secondhand. There's and it's just to meet the needs
Mm-hmm.
of the basics of what we need for the military. Where Canada has focused so much on the keeping the peace that, well, from my standpoint, they have just completely neglected the fact that we don't have the ability or the power to defend ourselves properly
Mm-hmm.
from anyone.
Hmm.
You know, we have relations with the states, and because of the relationship that we have with them, I'm pretty sure they would help us out. But if we were left to our own demise, that'd be a different story.
My interpretation of Canada on a global level is that we are more similar to sort of the organization of the UN in terms of the way we conduct ourselves and the way that we believe in certain things, that when other people perceive of Canada, they consider this a great place to be because of our tolerance and because of our open-mindedness and our acceptance. Now that's how I see it, as Canada, as sort of the cornerstone of what this country represents. Now, even the peacekeeping missions that Canada has always had, we're not sort of the aggressors.
No.
And so that's how I've seen Canada. But the way, from this conversation, I think that you are right in so many ways, in that, there is there's a lot of confusion right now happening, and there's a lot of mix-up of what this country's military background should be and where it goes, because we're so torn, man. Like, come on. Alberta and Ontario, for example, and like the East Coast, we are completely different countries within a country. We're so far apart. There, the geography of Canada is so big and wide. Some people think like this whole sweeping generalization that we're all Canadian. Sure, under one umbrella we are, but we are massively and so different from each other. And you can say the same for the States, but in Canada more so because of our population size. I think we're smaller.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't know. If you were to take Canada, you could easily divide it to 3 different sections. You have the West, which is, the part of Canada where you generate a lot of revenue for Canada, through natural resources and things of that nature. Then you have, the central part of Canada where, I would think that, Ontario's part of there, where they're, more power, more money hungry.
Financial, economic industries where there's more global money being thrown around. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then you have Eastern Canada, where they're there. They're not forgotten about, but they're not necessarily as important.
I have a friend who talked about regional disparity, and that the idea that there's been in Canadian history, there has been the the allocation of resources and focus from the federal government has been largely unequal. The inequalities of each province and so on and so forth. So the industries of the East Coast, primarily focus on fisheries and potato farming and farming and all those. I think they were largely misrepresented for so long that more focus was more in the central Canada area, and hence I think I don't know. Again, I don't like to speak politics because I'm not very good at it. I don't really know much about politics, but I do know that there is there's more focus on the capital, the nation's capital, in that area.
Yeah.
And I don't think most Ontario people that I know from Ontario realize that, because now that I've moved away from Ontario, we're not the center. Like, what makes us the center of this country's attention? What makes Ontario get everything, whereas all these other provinces are kind of like kicked to the side? At least they feel that way. Whether or not that's true is a different story. I think on the surface it does look that way.
Well, you have the, as we say, the nation's capital, which is Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the focus gets drawn there, gets put there. And, a lot of the country's financial resources get put there.
Yeah.
And then it gets put out to wherever it needs to go.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of like where some of the people get that mentality where, they're more important than the rest of Canada because of what it represents.
Now here's a segue. I'm going to try and segue this conversation from this dour subject of Canadian politics. Now, I know that you recently did a sort of like purge on your Facebook feed. So you kind of mentioned on Facebook, and you have a certain amount of friends, and you pretty much cut everything in half and deleted a bunch of friends off of there in a way to kind of like, focus on the people that actually matter that you talk to more frequently. On the other hand, you have someone like me who's got about over 1,000, and I don't talk to any of them, most of them at least, for a period of time. What's good for it is that I can kind of, showcase this. Now, here's the thing, though. If Canada, I'm going to bring this back to Canada. If Canada is looking for more of a unification, or like a unified voice that represents our country, so that when we go everywhere else in the country, I mean, I'm gonna be I'm gonna say this, and I'm embarrassed. Like maybe 10 years ago when I was in China visiting, I had bumped into a bunch of strangers, and they were like, "Oh, you're from Canada. Have you ever been to Banff?" And in the 20-something-year-old me, like I've never been out west, was like, "Oh, yeah, no, I haven't been to Banff." And they looked at me and they're like, "You're from Canada and you haven't been to Banff?" And I mean, that look kind of gave me this like, wow, Canada's so big and it's really hard to unify everyone and travel the country because it's so expensive. So, do you find that having a smaller social circle in today's era is more valuable? Obviously, it's definitely more valuable on a personal scale. But if you were to unify maybe or consider doing something a little bit more on a grander scale, do you find that having a larger social media group to be better?
Um, that I think so, but that is so complicated of because of us, basically. You know, you have so many different people from so many different backgrounds that have so many different views and opinions and whatever the case may be, due to their environments that they grew up in and such. Um, but if people were to put themselves and their personal gain aside, I think that it would definitely be possible.
Hmm.
It's like if you were to take all the different political parties in Canada, you know, take what they represent, take their views and everything else, and just put it aside and say, okay, let's focus on one topic, right? So let's say the unification of Canada. How do you get people from outside to view Canada as a single nation instead of, all these different nationalities and different lifestyles of
Mm-hmm.
just people have a harder time putting themselves aside and focusing on one thing.
And back to us. I mean, this is a great example. I mean, people are genuinely biased in their opinions and their prejudices, right? This idea that when I got on that plane and I first saw you, right? Like, in the back of my mind, I mean, first of all, on the surface, it's like, I see you, obviously when you get on a plane, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to gauge the person that you're going to sit beside for the next couple hours. And so,
Yeah.
from seeing you, the first impression was cowboy flying from Calgary going into a big city, right? That's the first impression that I got. Now, and then it's like, conversation with him, probably not, because we are so different in so many different ways. Correct?
Absolutely.
So I think generally speaking, the major consensus of this country and the people who live here is that if we see someone different and we assume that they're of a part of a certain group, we're going to avoid talking to them because there's nothing to talk about because we have nothing in common.
Right.
On the other hand, we take that jump, we take that leap of faith, and we extend our hand, or we extend, this opportunity for us to connect. Things happen, and I think, and look at this now. I mean, this is anecdotal advice or anecdotal evidence, but you and I are from different parts of the country, very different upbringing. I mean, if you can kind of look through some of my, chats and stuff, I talk a little bit about myself, but but we love our country, we care about it deeply, we are passionate people, and we are motivated to be better people, right? And I think that sort of draws people together, and hence that's why, having you on the show. First of all, thanks so much for coming on. But I think
Thanks for inviting me.
no, I think it's such a positive experience to be able to have conversations like this and to share our opinions and do this. I mean, the chat's a little quiet today, and they have been actually. I do a really bad job for not saying anything about the chat. People have been talking, but Essentially, I think people are looking for. I mean, for example, here's one that's coming up. Cheryl says, when people immigrate to Canada, they see the country as being a mosaic that invites cultural and ethnic diversity. However, each culture
Hmm.
has its own set of beliefs, values, and mentality, which makes a unity that makes unity a big challenge.
Well, okay. Let's thanks for that comment.
Thank you for that comment. Yeah.
But take something like Australia. Okay, so Canada, Britain, Australia, part of the Commonwealth. Um, Australia has set up and mandated that anyone that enters into their country has to assimilate to their way of doing things.
Oh
If
yes,
you
yes, yes, yes. My friend was talking about this too. Yes.
if you don't
Go
if
ahead.
you
Sorry.
don't like it,
Yeah.
yeah, if you don't like it, if you don't want to do the things we do, then leave.
Right. Right. Another person on the chat, Chrissy, says the difference between Alberta and Ontario really shows the mosaic. Like it doesn't matter. It's honestly it doesn't matter what your color, your skin, or the religion that you have. It's basically provincial now. It's like
Oh yeah.
it's like Alberta and Ontario, and then like Nova Scotia and like Vancouver, completely different in so many ways.
Well, you look at okay from Alberta to Ontario, you have the if I can use this phrase for Alberta, it's more like the grassroots of Canada.
Hmm.
You know, you have the prairies, which definitely, Saskatchewan would be in there, maybe parts of Manitoba. But you have the agriculture, which is basically how Canada started.
Hmm.
Everybody didn't matter where you were, where you put yourself in Canada. That's how you started. But as our different provinces developed, you could see different populations going off to different directions, doing different things, uh, kind of creating the backbone and the infrastructure that would develop that province. And Canada, sorry, Alberta is the only one that, well, besides Saskatchewan, I think, but it's the only one that we really haven't left that industry because that's what we're rooted in.
Hmm.
Whereas Ontario, I don't know much about Ontario, but it's very much um, it's an industry all by itself. It's more business orientated.
I would argue that the attraction of immigration and the hub for new immigrants makes it an economy in itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm gonna read the chat here. The Cheryl says the government of Canada needs to define itself as a distinct culture with its own defined set of beliefs and values and take after Australia's rule about assimilation, perhaps. Chrissy goes, at least us Canadians can be stereotyped as friendly polar bear riders that live in igloos and eat a lot of maple syrup while saying sorry.
And have absolutely no backbone.
Oh man,
I
that's
mean,
good.
I agree with everything that that was said that makes us the stereotypical Canadian
Yeah,
because that's what we want to see. That's how we want other people to see us as.
yeah, yeah.
But in the process, we through the political system, our backbone has been I don't know demolished. You have because of our need to be seen as a peaceful country, we don't want to rock the boat with anybody.
Hmm.
So I'm sure people have heard, stories where Canadians get stuck in a different country, whether they get put in jails or whatever the case may be, and the Canadian government wants to go through um, gently go through the political process
Right.
of trying to get that person back.
Right.
Whereas you look at other countries and they're like, no, this person belongs to us. Give this person back, or there will be consequences.
Mm. Yeah. No. See, those those stories of Canadians in weird situations or sort of unfortunate situations have never been in my mind because they're just so complicated. I cannot even imagine how to deal with it in the first place. It's so incredible that there are these people all over the country, like all over the world, Canadians dealing with such complicated issue matters. I do want to add to your point, though, Craig. I think that what Canada is doing right now, and eventually what's going to happen, is that they're promoting new forms of industry to take, so that Canada can take on and form a new form of identity. Because we're like at this point in time, we're at a stage where everything's moving at such a fast pace. Everyone's trying to kind of
Yep.
make sense of this acceleration that technology has given us. That we're all trying to figure out where we belong. I mean, there are so many new jobs and new forms, like new revenue streams that you can generate in with so many different things now. Like we can't really even you know pigeonhole someone for them. Like what do you do? You know what I mean? There are 12-year-old, 14-year-olds that are making millions of dollars on YouTube doing this specific thing. You know what I mean? But anyway, I don't want to hijack that conversation. It's great. I have a point here. It says here, Odometer says, I have a friend who was jailed in South Korea. The Canadian government promptly brought him back. And then he says, and he was arrested for drugs in a country punishable by death.
Well, it's great that he came back.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my not to be mean, because I don't want to step on people's toes or feet.
I think by now the chat
But
kind of knows you, man. You're definitely not the type to be. You're like the friendly giant, man. So don't even worry about that. Disclaimer right
but
there, man.
my dad had a wonderful saying. And I had to go through a few experiences myself to kind of understand what he said. So when he said it, I was at a younger age, but he said, "Son, stupid hurts. If you're going to be stupid about something, it's going to hurt on the other side."
Hmm.
So I mean, if you're going to be bringing um, drugs into an environment that you're not necessarily familiar with, um, yeah,
Yeah, I think Odometer was trying to point out that the Canadian government does care about Canadians overseas, and that the
extradition.
extradition process? Yes, thank you. Extradition process is reliable in that if we are Canadian, I mean, remember that news? Did you read that news about those guys in Thailand or in Cambodia? Those Canadians dancing, and they were dancing in a
No.
very provocative way, and there was pictures of them literally doing dirty dance, and they were like humping each other. But the Cambodian government, or the government, was so upset with it that they jailed them, and it became this huge news piece, and it went viral. There are lots of idiot. And back to your point is, if you're gonna be stupid, you're gonna be expect hurt.
And it just comes with it. But no, I think we as a society have gotten to the point where we don't plan um, and then look to see what the future effects are going to be.
Yeah,
we just plan to the near sighted, future. So like maybe 1 or 2 years out, and then make the plan and go with it.
Story of my life, Craig.
Well, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but I
Yeah.
mean, when you're in a bigger stage, it's definitely has a lot of potholes.
Yeah. You know what, Craig? I think it's been an hour and a little bit, so I'm gonna probably close out the chat now.
Okay.
From here, I want to thank you again for coming on the show. You brought some incredible perspective, and I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna skim over the video. I'm gonna highlight some of the things. There are some interesting things that you've said, and yeah, I had a really enjoyable conversation with you, man. Like again, I titled this stream as "Friends After 30," and I looked it up. It is a thing. I think that a lot of people don't realize that after a certain age, a certain stage in your life, meeting new people is a very tough thing. It's not easy because you have to take the step forward and do it, right? So you're a friend that I've met. Not necessarily after 30. I'm 30 now, but we've met pretty much the same idea, and I've had a really enjoyable time, like getting to know you, doing this.
Well, I definitely appreciate the invitation they gave me, and as well, I appreciate, having your quality friendship
Dude,
in my life.
I think a lot of kids will. I mean, people growing up now, or that is the essence of this podcast, is that we need to find that, and that hopefully people can have these discussions as well and find quality.
Well, I mean, it shakes the weight, so.
My friend, Odometer says Seinfeld has this skit. They go, "We don't take resumes after 30."
Ouch.
That's good.
Oh, hey. Thank you, Odometer.
Hey, no, thank you, man. It was very good. We'll talk to you offline, and hope you had a good time, dude.
All right, brother. Well, thanks again, man.
Okay, man. See you later.
Peace.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for watching the stream tonight and all the wonderful comments that kept this conversation going. I love everything about this show because it just brings out the best in people, I think, in their perspective. So hopefully you enjoyed the show as much as I did. We'll see you on Thursday. Peace.